Okay, good evening and welcome to the January 20th, 2022 meeting of the Open Space Conservancy Trust Board. I'm Tom Hildebrandt, Chairman, and we're proceeding to hold our meeting online electronically in accordance with the Governor's Proclamation 20-28.10 and the Governor's Extended Safe Start Order. This meeting is being broadcast live via Zoom. It will also be recorded and posted on the city's YouTube channel tomorrow. With us this evening, we have Deputy Public Works Director Elaine Summergren, Parks Operations Manager Sam Hard, and Natural Resources Project Director or Manager Lizzie Stone. There may be other people listening on the meeting, so you won't necessarily see all the people who are listening to your comments. When you do speak, for the sake of those who may be listening in, please state your name briefly so we can keep track of who is talking. At this point, let's have the roll call, please.
All right, Chair Hildebrandt.
Present.
Vice Chair Mercer.
Here.
Secretary Poor.
Here.
Trustee Bender. Trustee Olson.
Here.
Council Liaison Andro.
Here.
Trustee Ete.
Here.
All righty. I believe the next item of business is public appearances. Do we have any public appearances this evening?
We do not.
All right, then let's proceed. The next item on the agenda would be approval of the minutes from the November 18th meeting. So, could I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So move.
And a second?
Second.
All right, very good. Are there any corrections or discussion of the meetings as presented in the packet? I mean, the minutes as presented in the packet. Hearing none, I think we can proceed with our vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye and raise a hand. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Anyone opposed, say nay and raise a hand. Hearing none opposed, I think the motion is carried. All right. So next item on the agenda is review of our annual report to the City Council. And I believe that Lizzie Stone will be presenting that portion of the packet.
Hi.
Take it away.
How's it going? Okay, I am going to share my screen, but I actually just have the report itself. I just want to make sure we're all looking at the same spot on it. So let me figure that out. Okay, are y'all able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I wanted to walk through the annual report at a fairly high level and then open it up to discussion or suggestions before it is presented to council on March 1st. And when it is presented to council, it's also going to include the 2022 work plan. So this year's report shows that it was another somewhat abnormal year of short staffing and paused programs and contracting challenges, due in large part to the pandemic. And while that's true, we did accomplish some valuable work on trust property and were able to keep the parks open and accessible for the community. And so this report kind of describes those challenges and our goals to remedy the delays in the upcoming year, and then also highlights our work that we were able to get done. So we start out with sort of an overview of 2021 trust board meetings and trustee elections, followed by a description here of the natural resource program with the city and the staff that are involved with managing these trust properties. It describes also in here the staff transition that happened when Kim Frappier left her position last March, and then the resulting vacancy for a few months from March until basically the 1st of July. I started the last day of June when I started in this role. So that's what these sections here are talking about, as you all know. So then we go into talking about forest health and how the forests are managed on trust property. So we outline the plans, the various different plans that guide the work that we do and some of the specific activities that we use to manage these forests. Talk about invasive tree treatment, ivy ring creation, removing ground ivy and herbaceous weeds, and also installing new plants. Then we went into talking about the accomplishments from 2021. We worked on 31.5 acres of trust property. We did encounter some challenges with bidding out our contract work. There were some delays in the bidding process, and that led to bids being way higher than we had budget for. So talk about that in the report here and our plans to make up for that in 2022. Go a little overview here of the work that actually got done in numbers. Talk a little bit about the volunteer program, which has been more or less paused since the start of the pandemic. There have been a few events around the island, but none of them are on in Pioneer Park or Engstrom. It's been tricky with changing COVID protocols, and also our previous partners that we worked with to host volunteer events, a lot of them are rethinking their approach to doing volunteer services as a result of this pandemic. So we're working with them and having a lot of internal conversations right now to figure out how we can safely bring volunteers back to Pioneer Park in 2022. We then go into talking a little bit about what the seasonal trails and restoration crew did. They did planting maintenance around some of the more recently planted trees and shrubs. They watered some of the stuff that had gone in the last couple of years, and they did some really great monitoring and recording of noxious weed populations, as well as removing a lot of that noxious weeds that were found on this in the parks. This next section goes into talking about the forest health plan and progress that was made on the plan. This forest health plan was developed from the Forest Health Survey in 2009. The report here touches a little bit on the progress that was made early on with the early benchmarks and how we started out ahead of schedule, and then things slowed down in 2015 when it became harder to find qualified restoration contractors within our budgets. But that said, we are still moving forward and making a lot of progress on keeping ivy from overtaking our trees and keeping a handle on invasive trees that are growing in the parks. This year, the Forest Health Plan had us starting ground ivy and herbaceous invasive weed management, which is a lot more comprehensive approach to managing weeds than we have been doing to date. So that's removing like all of the weeds in a given area. So that was what was delayed this year with our contracting challenges. So we do plan to contract out all of the acres that were slated for 2021, as well as the acres that are slated for 2022, this upcoming year, in order to catch up on that metric. So towards the end here, we go into a little update on the letterboxing and leash policy education programs. Both of these are on hold due to the pandemic and not having a full recreation program this year. Staff are needed to be able to develop and print the booklets and pamphlets for these things and distribute this stuff, and we were very limited on staff this year. So we do hope to start those up again in 2022, and we've been having conversations about how to make that happen. So assuming things go well, we can restart those programs. And then with trails, the trails team performed their regular trails maintenance. A lot of that was also catch up from 2020 when we didn't have a seasonal crew to be able to do that work. And in addition to the regular maintenance, they also did some bigger projects, resurfacing trails in the southeast and the northwest quadrants, which involves adding in gravel and grading and making sure there aren't low muddy spots or tripping hazards or things like that. They also replaced some stair treads and did a lot of brushing of the very fast growing plants on the edges of these trails, making sure that they're accessible and safe for folks who are using our parks. And then finally, I talk a bit about urban forestry, which is basically talking about tree risk mitigation. So in 2021, we removed dead and dying trees that were posing a hazard. And this task requires continuous monitoring by staff and then moving in to do pruning and removal when necessary. So that is a continuous effort and will continue to happen in 2022. And that's all of me just kind of running through what the report includes. And I am open now to hearing y'all's input and any changes or edits that you want to see before this goes to council. I see
Yes.
Craig raising a hand, I think.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
just a little typo
Oh.
on trails. It's the second sentence right in the middle, or the beginning of the second sentence. One
Yes.
off, yeah.
Yep, I also saw that.
Thought it was Norwegian for a second, so very good.
Yep. I can't actually see everybody because I'm sharing my screen, so I'm not sure if someone who is able to see everyone, or are y'all not able to see everyone either? I just have one little person in the corner.
Yes, I guess I need to change my view so I can see.
Here, I can
everyone.
pull this shared screen. I can make that go away somehow.
All right. Deputy Director Summergren has a hand raised.
I do. I wanted to mention, Lizzie, that I wonder if the trails section isn't missing a piece of trail work that happened along the ravine trail. I thought that was this year that Andy was doing some work along that edge, but I may be off. So it may be worth just touching base with him to make sure that everything was captured in there.
Will do. Yeah, I'll check with him and make sure he's not forgetting something that happened earlier.
Thank you.
Any other comments on our report to council? So there was the slight clarification that I suggested in the draft, just adding invasive species removal to the last sentence under forest health plan progress. It says comprehensive removal, and that could use some clarification.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other comments on that work item? Then I guess we'll forward that to council as it stands with the corrections. And that means that we can move on to the next item in the agenda, which will be the work plan for next year. So before we look at the work plan in detail, you may have noticed that there are only 4 meetings scheduled in the work plan for this coming year. And the city manager has noticed that the city staff is under a lot of extra strain doing a lot of Zoom meetings, and it places a fairly heavy burden on their time, especially in evenings, doing these Zoom meetings. So in order to reduce that burden, there was a general suggestion made that the boards and commissions should make an attempt to reduce their meeting schedules, regularly scheduled meetings. And in reviewing the work plan for this coming year, it appears that the 4 meetings will be sufficient to take care of the business that we have set before us. So in an early discussion with Deputy Director Summergren, I approved the idea of coming up with a draft schedule that contained only 4 meetings. However, I cannot speak for the entire board, and therefore I think we need to take explicit action in revising our meeting schedule. So at this time, I'd like to entertain a motion to move to a quarterly meeting schedule. Yes,
I move that we move to 4 meetings next year, or this year, 2022.
thank you. And do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
Second. Okay.
Thank you, Sherry. And okay, so then the proposal then is that we will hold our meetings this year on the 4th Thursday of the first month of each quarter. Is there any discussion on this proposal? Yes,
I believe that's the 3rd Thursday of,
third Thursday.
yes.
Did I say that? Meant to say that. Third Thursday of the first month of each quarter. Councilmember Andlaurel, you had a comment?
Oh, yeah, there's just a question. I mean, or clarification. I assume that if circumstances evolve where we need a special meeting, we can call one.
Yes, of course. So this is just for our regularly scheduled meetings. Trustee Poor, you have a comment?
Yeah, thanks. I know in other years we have done a bit of a scan at the close of the prior meeting to make sure that people will be in town. And I'm just noticing July is the time when people often travel. So I assume in April we could check in and make sure attendance is good and there's not a need to reschedule.
Yes. If we don't anticipate a quorum for a meeting, we could shift that by a month or so in order to ensure that we have our necessary quorum.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks for that suggestion. Okay, so the motion on the floor is to go to a quarterly meeting schedule, assuming there's no further discussion. All those in favor say aye and raise a hand, please. Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Anyone opposed, say nay and raise a hand, please. Hearing no dissension, the motion passes. So we're now on a quarterly schedule. And so let's proceed to, yes.
Just as a point of clarification, I believe that Jerry was muted during the vote. I just want to make sure that we capture her wish on that.
Thank you, Elaine. I voted aye,
Great,
despite
thank
being
you.
muted.
Thank you. All right, let us proceed and look at the content of the work plan then for this coming year. Would you like to make the presentation, Elaine?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you, Chair Hildebrandt. I'm going to quickly share my screen here. There we go. And I will assume that you all can see that. Is that correct? Yes. Okay.
Good to go.
Thank you. Again, for the record, Elaine Summergren, Deputy Public Works Director. I just wanted to go through the work plan, which we did a fair amount of work on at the November meeting last year, just to make sure that we were capturing all of the items that there was interest in adding. Like Chair Hildebrandt mentioned, we did have to do some shuffling of items, but really wanted to make sure that the workload across the year and across the 3 remaining meetings for 2022 was doable and that it felt relatively balanced. So this is a fairly light meeting, I would say. In April, we have listed on the work plan the restoration work plan, which is a recurring item for us. An update on the letterboxing program and whether there are opportunities for the trust to be involved with the development of that program. We'll be coming back finally with the fire management plan amendments to the Pioneer Park Vegetation Management Plan at the next meeting. And that is taking into account all of the proposed edits from the last meeting when the trust discussed this item. And then also the trail work plan, which is again a recurring item where our trail specialist comes in and talks about the planned work for the year and answers any questions from the trust. I believe we also have another regular business item tonight where we'll be talking about potentially adding something to this work plan about trails. And the idea being that perhaps that could come back as part of that trail work plan discussion. In July, we have the election of officers, an update on the Angstrom title transfer, a discussion about potentially a permanent restroom facility and what would be involved in that, and options. And then an update on off-leash dog education measures, and really an update on what we're hearing from the police department or any other complaints that the city's receiving, and then any measures that we're taking to address complaints, concerns, etc. October 20th is again a little bit of a light month, and I think this is not a bad thing because it means that we can either revisit items that need more attention that have come up at the previous 2 meetings. Right now we have the annual herbicide application report, again, a recurring item. An update on the success or not success of the 84th Avenue parking project. So once those permanent markers get installed along the road edge, and really evaluating whether this is something that is working well and potentially could be used in other places. And then if we indeed have any Eagle Scout projects on trust properties this year, that is the meeting at which we normally would recognize them, as well as any letterboxing participants if that program does come back in 2022. I'm happy to revisit any of these, or if there are other suggestions of things that trustees would like to add to the work plan, now is a great time to do it. And otherwise, I think I'll just say this is included in the annual report to council as a courtesy each year so that they know what is on your docket. I think it's just a good communication measure every year. So with that, I will turn it back to the trustees, and I'm going to stop sharing if that's okay. I can always pull it back up.
That sounds good. Okay, are there any modifications, additions, suggestions, or general comments on the work plan as proposed? Well, that's
Success.
yes. I guess we did a very good job of filling out the slots last time, and we did a pretty good job of shuffling them in our meeting last week. So I would say that we're prepared to approve the work plan as we see it before us, which is excellent.
Fantastic. Thank you.
And I don't think we need a formal vote on this. We just say we approve and send it off as it is. So that's very good.
Yeah, and then we, just as a note, you know, the way that the annual report typically works is that staff will go back, make any changes, you know, correct typos, all of that kind of stuff, run it by the chair one more time before it then goes into the council packet. So we do get eyes on it one more time, but I think this is adequate input from the trust. So thank you.
Okay, very good. The next item on the agenda is to open a discussion on the possibility of adding some trails in Pioneer Park. And this is my idea, coming partly from the input that we received from the cross-plan surveys that were sent out to the community and gathered, and partly from my observation that there are some areas of the park that are fairly inaccessible using the existing trail system. So I thought it might be worth visiting the idea of adding a few trails to access those less visited areas of the park. So at a high level, does this sound like something that the members of the trust board would be in favor of? Yes, council member
Yes.
Enroll.
If I could speak to that, I guess I have a pretty firmly entrenched reputation for being the council member with lots of financial concerns about things. So I will continue to ride that horse. You know, we're, I think, backlogged on trail maintenance as it is. And so the only concern I have, while I'm, you know, deeply in favor of making the open space and parks in general accessible, I do have concerns about creating new maintenance obligations when we can't keep up on our old ones. So that's just one piece of the puzzle to consider as we factor in what the pros and cons are of that.
Yes, also Deputy Director Summergren said that it would be a good idea to fold any recommendations for new trails into the comprehensive parks plan that is being developed. So, and I'm not sure quite where we are in that process, but there was some discussion of adding some trails. And actually in the 6-year plan, there were a number of new trails mentioned.
Yeah, I think so. They handed the Parks, and we had a study session just 2 days ago on that, on the pros plan, and the Parks and Rec Commission then handed the pros plan off to the council for consideration, I think, and longer discussion in the March 1st meeting. Is it, Elaine? Is that right? Is that the March 1st meeting? I think
it's still on the February 15th meeting.
Oh, is it? Okay.
I believe so.
Yeah, definitely could be my mistake. I haven't looked at the council work plan since Tuesday. So, but it's coming up very quickly. I know a lot of the new trail recommendations were to kind of connect existing networks that had gaps in them. But, you know, certainly it could be a component. That was it. I just didn't want to, you know, building the trails, of course, will cost money, and then maintaining them will cost money. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that as one of my
consideration
ongoing concerns.
The Trustee Ate.
Thanks, Tom. I wonder to what extent we have the potential for some of the maintenance costs being deferred to service learning opportunities, either at the middle school or Island Park or any of the elementary schools, in terms of their green clubs. I know sometimes they're almost looking for things to do. So I wonder if, you know, having some of the after school clubs being involved in that might be a way to have some kind of regular maintenance rotating schedule, or with some of the groups that are doing environmental service work at the JCC or through any of the many churches on the island, or even through volunteerism on Nextdoor. I feel like volunteer trails maintenance and work in our parks is really underutilized. And I feel like there's a lot of motivation to be doing more stewardship on behalf of the community. And I wonder if we can look into those avenues, whether through schools or community groups.
Trustee Ete, I'll just address that and say, I think one of our most limiting factors right now is volunteer management and coordination, because, you know, as Lizzie mentioned, we've lost our 2 main partners in volunteer management. And we've found through experience that sort of setting people loose on trails doesn't always work out super well. We do need a fair amount of oversight and some visioning about what sorts of things we'd like to achieve. I totally agree with you that there's a lot that could be done to make use of all that energy, especially now. We have held a lot of trails events in the past. We've actually contracted specifically for trail maintenance events, and while it's been a while since we've done it, they've typically been very poorly attended. Our restoration events tend to be gather much more interest. That may have changed in the last few years, you know, as everything else has changed. So I think it's certainly worth looking into. And I think Also, we have folks who ride bikes on our trails too, and I know they have a very vested interest in making sure that, you know, those trails are being kept up so that, first of all, they're not doing damage to them, but that they're really, you know, maintained in a sustainable way. So I think there's something to explore there.
Great. Thank you, Elaine. I wonder, is there a rule or is it okay within the bylaws for trustees to be involved in volunteer coordination at all and in terms of our capacity, or is that not a thing?
It's not a thing. How about that?
Okay.
That's certainly something that is a potential. I would say that it would be sort of a similar process to what we go through with our forest steward program. So, you know, when we have volunteers leading other volunteers, we do the normal things like background checks. And so we need to make sure that when you're working with community members, you understand the waiver processes for working on city properties. And so there are some logistics to work through, but certainly that's something that we could, you know, we would be happy to work with trustees on.
Great.
And Lizzie's here. Lizzie has something to jump in on there.
Been here all along. I was just hiding. Yeah, I really do like that idea, Hillary. I think to reiterate what Elaine said, it is not free or necessarily particularly easy to bring in volunteers with the current city staffing that we have, and that's why we've engaged partners in the past. But I think that the way around that is to have forest stewards or maybe trustees who are trained and able to do that on their own. So there's kind of an upfront effort to train folks and make sure that everybody's on the same page and that people are going to stay safe and legal with what they're doing on city property. But yeah, I think that's could be a good option.
Okay. Count me in if you want to explore those ideas.
I definitely want to explore those ideas, and I look forward to talking to you more about it.
Great.
All right, I see Trustee Poor has a hand raised, so do you have a comment?
I simply wanted to clarify something that Deputy Public Works Director said. Did you say that, were you making a distinction between volunteer work recruiting opportunities for restoration versus maintenance? Is that what you were saying, that maintenance isn't well attended, but restoration is?
No, I was actually talking specifically about trails events. We've had various trails events over the years that have been both for trails construction, which tend to be a little more well attended because it's a more exciting prospect, right? But we've also had them for trails maintenance. And if I have to make a generalization, I would say that both of those types of events are not as well attended.
As the restoration
events.
So I would be interested, along with Trustee Ete, about the volunteering opportunity of the trustees. That's all.
Yes,
Thank you.
and I'd also be interested in participating in that if we can help to organize trail maintenance crews. To circle back, it seems like there's not a great deal of support in this group for building new trails at this time, so I'll let that matter drop, and we can pursue the volunteer opportunities for trustees with the city. So that's all I had on that topic, unless there's further. Yes, Manager Stone.
Hi, Manager Stone. I like that. I did just want to, not to discourage the idea of putting in new trails, but just wanted to make sure it was thought about that there is ecological value in having areas that don't have trails cutting through them. And having trails creates a lot more edges in a forest, and edges are a lot more vulnerable to invasive weeds and to disturbance. And also having people walking on trails and dogs running off of trails and things like that, which is an issue in of itself. But just wanted to put that out there, that it's not only positive things of people getting to see the beautiful parts of the park, which is great, but there are some impacts of doing that for the habitat and for the forest health. Yeah, just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, thank you. And Trustee Poor?
Hope I'm not outwearing my welcome here. I would just be interested in, to the extent that you raised this as an issue, I was wondering where you had been thinking that trails would be helpful or interesting before we table, or, before we put this aside.
All right. Well, I had noticed that the southeast corner of the Southeast Quadrant has a large section that doesn't have any trails in it. And that's just an area that I thought would provide additional room for roaming. I know that deer hang out there, so the countervailing force there would be that the deer would be crowded out a little bit from that area. And the other place where I thought it might be interesting to have a link up trail would be to have something that from the ravine trail that goes up to the end of the ravine and dead ends, if we could extend that up the opposing hillside to link back up with the trail that goes up that side of the ravine, then that would turn that dead end into a loop and it would get more use. So that's what I had in mind. Yes, enough said.
I want to thank Lizzie for jumping in on this. When Tom and I first spoke about this topic, my feeling was that if the trust wants to pursue additional trails in the trail network, I think there would be a fair amount of considerations, both financial, as Lisa brought up, but certainly ecological as it balances with the trust mission. And then also in terms of the master plan for the park. So I think if the trust is interested in pursuing this either now or in the future, we'd want to be able to kind of step back and give a little more context about the trail network as it is. In more recent past, I think we've actually talked more about decommissioning redundant trails so that we can actually coalesce some of these fragmented parts of the park in areas where there's just a really high density of trails within one area. So just some context for you all about, I think, where staff is just in terms of thinking through these potential projects coming up. Yes,
Trustee Brisseth.
Yeah, so I think, my comment really just sort of touches on that. I just, as I think about, what would the metric be, or how would we assess a need or lack of need? Because if there's no trail in there, of course, there's no foot traffic. But I wonder, if there is an opportunity to look at those areas that could be decommissioned, so to speak, or because again, I think we have to think about the balance. You don't want to keep adding new things if in fact we have a concern about oversaturating the properties that we have. And I don't know the answer to this question. I'm just posing it. What sort of metric or what sort of data would we look at to make some of these choices?
I don't know that there's a great and perfect answer to your question, Lynn. We talk more about trail lengths through the entire island, but even more so, and I think if you look at some of the documents that are within the PROS plan, that there are some missing links within the trail system across the island. So really getting people from one place to another. And there are areas where they just aren't served very well by trails. And there are, perhaps there's an open space in the way or an undeveloped right of way or, really steep topography. I mean, we see that around mid-island, very few connections between Island Crest Way and East Mercer Way. And so I think that that's where a lot of the focus has been, is that by creating these very specific connections in these more sort of dead times, that it actually improves the walkability of the entire island. So I think a lot of the focus on making those trail connections are really specifically looking at those areas where there's broken links. Now, if you wanted to scale that to Pioneer Park, I think that there isn't an inherent value at looking at the trail system as it stands now and saying, does it serve, you know, the people in the neighborhoods who use it for connectivity, right? Who use it to get from one part of the island to QFC, right? And is it actually precluding people from using those trails as a pathway? So I think that that's not an invaluable exercise, right? To really be looking at it comprehensively. So, and I think you're right, you know, is there finding a balance of maybe there are more useful places to build trails. I think about Andy, I think about him evaluating trails on how sustainable they are, right? If certain trails, especially in some of the flatter areas of the park where we don't get positive drainage off the trails, they maybe just aren't situated in great places. Perhaps they were social trails to begin with that were then just formalized, but they weren't necessarily designed thoughtfully about the topography and the drainage. And so I think there's, you know, over the years, he's picked off some of these problem areas that are just sort of maintenance sinkholes, right? Where he has to keep going back to deal with them. And he's ended up doing small reroutes, but I think it would be a really interesting exercise to talk about, you know, what he sees on the trails in terms of, you know, whether it's, you know, redundancy, whether they're problem areas for maintenance, and, you know, and this is typical for landscape architecture too, is looking at where people put social trails, because they're usually desire lines about where people want a trail, right? And maybe it offsets another trail that's in a slightly more inconvenient location. So I think there's a lot of different ways to look at the issue that's not just about the metric of number of trail miles.
Right.
It can be more about the usefulness and the sustainability of the trails you do construct.
Yes, I think that's good input. It might be instructive to have Andrew come to one of our meetings and make a presentation along those lines, what his ideal trail system would look like inside of Pioneer Park. And if there are specific changes that he would make, we should consider them and make a recommendation accordingly.
Have him do that as a part of his regular trail work plan. So I think it's a good opportunity. I know when he has specific issues that he feels very strongly about, that's the time when he brings them up to the trust. But I think maybe you're right, zooming out and doing more of a comprehensive look from his view might be really useful for the trust.
All right, well, that works nicely. This was going to be an item to go into the trail work plan for
Yeah, for
the April
April.
meeting. So it would be optional for him to do that additional work, but if he has opinions to share with us, I would be interested in, at least I would be interested in hearing them. Okay, that was our final item of regular business, unless there's any further discussion about trail expansion. And that means we can move into quadrant reports and any new business that you would like to bring up. So let's begin first with the Northwest Quadrant.
That's us, Craig.
I went out on Monday and it was very busy.
Yeah.
84th had 15 to 20 cars on it. It was pretty crowded and very well used. And I did discover a tree actually had come down and reported it on the city's app. for getting stuff done, and they said they would take care of it. So I haven't seen where it is. It's in that area just south of where the restoration area is on the Woodpecker Trail. It was a big, huge alder that came down, but it was really easy to get around. So I assume they've probably taken care of it because it was big. And actually, we had talking about the trails, that Woodpecker Trail, that is, gosh, it'd be great to have that one, have a little more work on it. But like Elaine was saying, maybe that's just a trail that, ended up being there and it's kind of in a mud hole. And I remember last year when they fixed an area in the Southeast Quadrant, running right through the middle, east to west trail. I don't remember the name of it, but boy, it made a huge difference where they put on some of that gravel, and now it's super, super nice. And the trail crew did just a great job. So anyway, that's my report.
I will report on the Northwest Quadrant to say that over the holidays, we had family in town, and there were a lot of, we discussed the bench, which I think is Maryland's bench, and my family who just thought it looked really good. So I know that some recent work had been done on that. And then I was out of my quadrant over on the Ravine Trail, and that went through a muddy patch that I shared with Elaine. So that's my report for the month. Thanks.
All right, let's move next to the Northeast Quadrant. That's my area, but I have not been out there, so I'll have to rely on. Is that? Yes. You'll need to unmute yourself.
I've been in the Northeast and the Southeast quite a bit in the past number of weeks, and I have to say overall it's been looking really good. I think it's evident that, with the brush clearance that's happened, I don't know how extensively that's happened, but I almost feel like so much of the trail maintenance work is done so well that you don't even notice. And I know that's by design oftentimes. And I really want to commend Andy on one of those trouble spots that I know is always constant for him, is kind of that very muddy, almost end area in the Ravine Trail. And I think there's a seep there. Is that right, Elaine? That runs down there. And so I know he's constantly having to replace the wood and the grading on that boardwalk. And even in this very wet, saturated time of year, it's just looking awesome. And the loop that leads up from there, and you can really tell the difference. And I know that ivy in the southeast corner is a persistent problem, and Lizzie was speaking to us about the comprehensive plans to address that. But I think while it's evident that in both the northeast and the southeast that the ivy is starting to come back up the trees, it's not as bad as I thought it would be, given the breaks in maintenance that we've had to take with COVID. So I think all in all, things are looking really great.
Thank you. And let's have a report on the Southeast Quadrant. That may be Trustee Bender's area, and she's not with us this evening.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Marie and Carol and I typically do the Northeast and the Southeast every time we walk. So I think
it's kind of a
three of us usually cover it.
Yeah, I was in the Northeast with my grandson over the weekend, and like Craig, I've noticed a lot of foot traffic because I think it was one sunny day or one non-rainy day. But of course, there's the recurring mucky areas. But I have to think overall, when one thinks about where we were a little over a year ago after the heavy storms and ice and such, the repairs are significant. And obviously, there are going to be ongoing things that need to be addressed. But I think overall, it's looking good.
I will say I want to thank each of you that have just taken time to snap a picture and send an email to either me or Sam or Andy or Lizzie, anyone It's worked out really nicely just to hear what you're seeing in the field, and we can put in a service request for it right away. And it's great because we can get eyes on it very quickly with the crews. I wanted to thank Jerry particularly about that muddy patch in the Northeast Quadrant. Andy went out there right away to take a look at that and is planning his work on it currently. So thank you to all of you.
And thank you for your reports. That's our last item of business. We'll announce that the next meeting is scheduled for the 21st of April. And I'll hope to see you all then. So are there any final comments before we close the meeting?
Thank you.
Very well then. I think we're done. So I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All right. And I assume that we have general approval for this, or I guess we should say aye.
Aye.
Okay. And please remain on the camera until the recording is ended.